I want to welcome you back. This session, which is devoted to an absolutely crucial topic, just to restate something I said in my introduction, but hopefully more briefly, we have felt from the very beginning that the issues that CEU has faced are also faced in different ways and in different forms by other Hungarian institutions. And we felt from the beginning of our little local difficulty the support and solidarity of our Hungarian colleagues and friends. And I just wanted to, again, in front of them, to say how important it is to us as a Hungarian institution to be in Hungary, to be part of a truly great intellectual tradition. Let me just very briefly introduce Attila Chikan. Attila Chikan is a trustee of Central European University. He is an extremely distinguished professor of economics at Corvinus, another great institution in Hungary. Through the 1970s and 80s, he was and is still associated with Reich College, one of the places of freedom in the late communist world. And one of the reasons that Attila Chikan is held in such respect in Hungarian academic life is that in a very difficult period in late communism, Attila Chikan stood for academic freedom in extremely difficult circumstances. And I just want to say to him personally that he is an absolute treasure for CEU and one of the trustees who has been most helpful as a source of guidance and advice throughout the situation we've been through. And I did want to use this moment to thank you personally, Attila, in front of the whole audience for everything you've done for this university. And now, you're up, Attila. It's all your show. Off we go. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very kind words. I hope that we are not at the end of the struggle for the presence of CEU in Budapest, and we can continue working for the sake of the Hungarian and general global economic freedom. It's also a pleasure for me to be part of this discussion this morning, which will actually focus on the Hungarian situation, which is a bit far from the contents of the presentation we had earlier, but I think that this one has given a very stable and very important framework for how to think about academic freedom. CEU has collected a very distinguished panel for this discussion. The members are Valéria Csépe, who is president of the Hungarian Accreditation Committee, which is one of the most important unit or institution of Hungarian academic life, and especially in the orientation of various universities and the program of those universities. So actually she is more or less responsible for the contents of what we are doing at the university. István Kenesei, Professor Emeritus of the University of Szeged, which is in many years the most distinguished university of Hungary in the international ranking of universities. The Szeged University has some very prominent departments and faculties, and I think that these experiences which you can bring to us from this university is very important for seeing what does it mean to shape the program of a particular university. László Vass is the rector of one of the innovative institutions in Hungary, the Metropolitan University, and he's also president, as you can see, read it, of the private institutions section of the Hungarian Rectors Conference. It's certainly private institutions are a very important segment of university life in Hungary, and I believe that their support for academic freedom is very important for us. Katalin Tausz is a very distinguished professor, a long-term supporter of the development of Hungarian academic life, and he is representing well, it's a university which I think the most prestigious in our country. So this is a very nice panel, and I will give you a very short introduction for the discussion, and then we will go on with the panel members who will also have very short discussions, and then we can open up for questions. I go back in time a little bit, and I think it's important to understand that when we actually faced the transition at the end of the 1980s, then there was a clear need of a major change in the Hungarian university, in general higher education life. Hungary was among the last ones in the ranking of enrollment numbers in Europe of students due to the policy of the communist regime. I don't really like this expression, but actually I have to use it. We had very mixed quality. We had very good universities, very good faculties, and I think that it's important that we admit that some of the other faculties and departments were not as good as we wanted to see. My university was very lucky, because at the end of the second part of the 90s, I was at Corvinus University, or the predecessor of this university at that time, and we had a program at the second part of the 1980s, actually financed by George Soros. That's important to mention here, which made it possible that over 50 young professors of our university had the opportunity of spending a year, or a semester at least, in the United States, the West American University. So this university was very well prepared for the transition, I can tell you. It was a substantial part of the faculty who actually had very personal and very fresh impression of what's going on in university life, mostly in the United States, but also in Western Europe. The organizational background of our higher education was very unstable. There were a lot of discussions about having so many universities, so many higher institutions, and actually we had some funding from the IMF or the World Bank, of that time to change the organizational structure of higher education, and the idea was to have much less institutions than we had at the time. I don't go very much into details. I just would like to mention that the problems we are facing today are not really new, many of them not new. That's very important to see, because if we do that, if we take a look at that, then we can understand how to focus on those problems which are actually timely today. So I think it's important to distinguish the long-term problems and the long-term cultural and institutional problems which we face, and those which we actually have to get to these days. Well, the subsequent governments didn't have a consistent policy for higher education. This led to an instability, a constant instability of the institutions. My university has changed faculty at the faculty level 4 times in the last 25 years, which is, I think, that makes it very unfavorable for developing actually the contents of education. As you will see, the financial resources, especially from the middle of the 1990s, were very scarce at the universities. And also I have to admit that we were very slow to respond to the changes which actually happened in the country. So unfortunately, higher education was not the driving force of intellectual changes. It had its, I could give a talk about that, why it was more or less sociological necessity of how the universities operated and were financed. But what I have to add as a good news is that there was and there is a gradual improvement of the contents of the education. We have better courses than we had 20 years ago. We have better educated teachers than we had 20 years ago. And what's even more important, we have much better prepared and more talented students than we had 20 years ago. I think that even though we have a lot of problems with the basic education, we still have to see that according to my personal experience, the students of today are prepared to meet the changes which they have to meet according to the new development in the global economy or global society. Well, since 2010, when the new government, new at that time, the second Orbán government started to operate, there is a general tendency of centralization at the government. They are not only centralizing higher education, they are centralizing more or less everything they can. So again, it's very important to see that the steps made at the higher education at the universities are not very different from similar steps in other areas of life and institutional developments in Hungary. What is new, actually, is the political and ideological influence. I think that living through the 1990s, you know, I was, and 2000, I was a department chairman and a member of the Senate of Corvinus University. Later, I was rector of the university, so I actually had a first-hand experience, and I didn't really have experienced any political influence on our operation. Today, this is the situation is somewhat different, because there are examples. I don't say that the higher education is overwhelmed by political influence, but there are very striking examples of that. Maybe in the discussion we can come up with some concrete situations, but I don't want to go into that one. And this is very dangerous, especially because there are some steps which stem from this new attitude. There are some steps which influence the institutions and its operation from the point of view of the ideology instead of academic considerations. And this is, I think, it's a very dangerous from the point of view of academic freedom, what they are talking about. I think it's very important to see that what I have said as a story, as a kind of a history of what happened, is supported by the legal developments which was behind those changes. In 1993, when at that time they have produced new laws in all areas of life, day by day, so the parliament at that time worked by machine, was producing new and new laws which were closer to the ideas of market economy and the social developments we wanted to make. I just would like to advance one interesting issue, and that was whether we should follow the German or the Anglo-Saxon tradition in the reforming of higher education. That was a heated debate, and there were very important arguments at both sides. And well, we managed to mix the two, which is not very favorable, but more or less declined towards the Anglo-Saxon system. But it just tells you that how fundamental questions were made. So it was not minor changes in curriculum or one department to the other, but the whole philosophy of higher education and its role in the society was at stake at that time. The introduction of tuition fees was an important and interesting step. It was actually supported by myself and by a number of student organizations as a step towards a market economy and a market-driven society, of course, it would have gone together with a system of scholarships and a system of social support for students. And so, unfortunately, the government of that time just picked the tuition fee and didn't really care about the other side of the picture. So it was amended or abolished rather soon. There were permanent, almost permanent changes in the laws, as you can see, and since the 2010s, a new wave of centralization has hit us. The independence of universities was hurted in many ways. One of them was which made many important debates was the introduction of the role of chancellors, which is rather different from the chancellors in the American universities. As a matter of fact, the households of the universities were really not in order. I would say that there had to be changes. But this change at that time happened with centralizing a lot of things and distributing power between the rector and the chancellor in a way which actually, as written here, through the influencing of the academic part of university life, had a major influence on the freedom of universities. Of course, there are differences between chancellors of universities. Some places the system operates acceptably, some other places not, but the idea itself, I think, is very much towards centralization. And as a matter of fact, the 2017 change of the higher education law, at least for myself, came as a surprise, because even though we had a system of changes which has shown towards the inclination towards centralization, this one was very much, according to my view, a step towards politics-oriented decision-making instead of academic-oriented decision-making. It didn't follow from the previous developments of neither the system nor the legal background to it. Just to show, I finish with a few illustrations that this policy is not really efficient, it's not really favorable. The number of students is declining, of course, the number of population is declining also, so it needed a more thorough evaluation if you want to go into details. But still, it is spectacular that in the last years there was a notable decline. What is even worse, the higher education spending is going down in the last few years. Here I have to tell and admit that in 2015 and 16 it has increased, but we didn't have a consistent time series, which is always a problem for an economist, to show that we have to see that it has increased, but it is still far away from the peak where we have started from. This is a striking figure, that the public expenditure on tertiary education, where Hungary is at the end of the row of this graph. Frankly speaking, I don't know how Italy happened to be after us. I just got this picture 2 days ago, and I just cannot stand not to put it into this presentation, even though I cannot give you a very good explanation about the Italian situation. And I think that it's important to finish this short presentation with telling that people are unhappy with those developments which I told you about. There were several demonstrations by university students, by high school teachers, for especially academic freedom and for general developments in education as well. I think that it's important to understand that those people who are most affected by the changes, those young people who face the higher education system today, would like to have a different way of going ahead. So that's kind of a semi-historical and semi-legal background, and now I would like to ask my colleagues here to go on this part of the presentation. Valéria, I think that you should be the first. Thank you very much.
Can I say it? I didn't follow my usual way to have a slideshow or any kind of presentation or doing my profession is the usual case. So I'm a psychologist by degree and cognitive neuroscientist by the field of research of mine, and since 1st of September 2016 the president of the Hungarian Higher Education Accreditation Committee. So since then, we have been working on how to facelift a little bit the Hungarian Accreditation Committee, so in order to work better and to abandon the previous role of being the policeman of the Hungarian higher education. And from this point of view, when I got this invitation as a scientist, I started to dig in the literature and looking for data, how it looks like for Hungary, for two issues. One is the academic freedom, and it's a very much interrelated field, the internal autonomy for institutions. And as you heard, so the Hungary underwent a row of different so-called reforms, and all the legislative changes and content changes and institutional changes, reorganizing and reorganizing and reorganizing again. And this is the question how it influences our higher education institutions. And one is the internal academic affairs, so how autonomous they are, and what is the possibility of the university to decide about very important issues, not only the overall student number or how to set the admission criteria, the content and the capacity, etc. But from the point of view of an accreditation committee, so the selection done by a higher education institution, the quality assurance providers. And from this point of view, so for example, the European Universities Association has a lot of data, a lot of statistics on this. And from this point of view, Hungary belongs to the countries where universities can choose the quality assurance agency freely according to their needs. So they including agencies from other countries. So within the European Union, that's the ENCA members, so that the European Network of Quality Assurance Institutes, and even on a higher level, the ECAR, so that's the European Quality Assurance Register. So who are registered, these are entitled to run this process. And from this point of view, so Hungary is rather in the highest scores belongs to those countries for whom this applies, and so for the EUA statistics, there are 21 countries where they cannot choose the quality assurance agencies so freely. And these are very new data, so from this point of view, so everything is all right. The question is, whether it's really everything okay, what concerns the academic freedom and what concerns the university's autonomy. And I found some very important data, so they are very much sticking to the data as a researcher. So I have my own opinion as well, but usually a researcher behaves in that way, sticks with the data, looks for evidences, what's going on. And what I see in Hungary is a serious dissociation, what is given on the legislative level, for example, in the constitution. So where it's stated the academic freedom, so for science, higher education and everything, although already in the constitution there is a restriction for universities, so the academic freedom is not the same as it is stated, for example, for the academic freedom for research, for science. So for science is rather general and not that general for the higher education. So this leads further to the restrictions what concerns the higher education. So the institutions, because especially the state-owned or state-regulated universities and those, the private institutions, private universities recognized by the state. Therefore, from a quality assurance point of view, they are the same. So the institutional autonomy is fully compliant in many of the countries. For example, there is another study on the 28 member states of the European Union, still 28, and Hungary, for Hungary this is not fully compliant. And it's related to the restriction of higher education, and I quote from the Hungarian constitution: higher education institutions shall be autonomous in the terms of content and the methods of research and teaching. Their organization shall be regulated by an act. The government shall, within the framework of an act, lay down the rules governing the financial management of public higher education institutions and shall supervise their financial management. So it's very robust constitutional provision, and the question is how is going on. And what I really do like when I go for these comparisons and for data are these so-called scorecards. What kind of scorecards we do have for the Hungarian higher education? For example, ratification of international agreements and constitutional protection of academic freedom. So in the rank countries, because there are multiple entries on at different numbers at ranks, so finally it's 10, and Hungary is the 9th from this point of view. So what is in the international regulations, how we are there, and what we are doing in our higher education legislation. And in our higher education legislation, Hungary there is a ranking for 6. So it depends on the percentage and score out of 20 in the criteria. So the Hungary is the 5th again, so from 20 parameters, only 5 are met. How we protect our academic freedom in the higher education legislation. So we can go through all the ranks and you find always Hungary on the last position or before the last, protection of institutional autonomy, etc. And it's laid down in a legislative process. And this is a sort of restrictive system, and it has a historical background. This paternalistic view on higher education. that policymakers, politicians know better than we know how we should run a university, how we should run different institutions, what are the most important issues. In the same time, there are changes which tell us that, for example, from a quality assurance point of view, what are the criteria? So the quality criteria, how to run a university, what are the students' interests, how we can judge on the outcomes of higher education. And from this point of view, there is another participant in violating. So we are speaking too much because there is a recent reason for doing so, speaking too much about politics. But the question is, and I see from the point of view of the Higher Education Accreditation Committee, how the stakeholders and participants, university professors in different positions, working in different committees, violate to a different extent the academic freedom of the others. When judging new courses, new programs, new doctoral schools, the accreditation of institutes, etc., sometimes it's related to serious competition. In Hungary, we learn to compete and not to cooperate. This is very important, so the balance between the two. And the other one is professional judgment influenced by political bias. And this is the most difficult to trace, to correct, and to go with. And this is highly important. And another part is the unconscious bias. And this unconscious bias is often there, and so we have to work on this to prevent this dissociation of what's going on, because very often we do not speak about it. And I see in the different judgments, different evaluations, how it comes through. And especially what was there in the brilliant plenary, that is, or intolerance, the orthodoxy in our universities, that the orthodoxy is usually expressed and presented and pushed through by people in position who are intolerant toward a new program, to free inquiries, etc., etc. It's very important. In my own profession, happened several times. How intolerant the main line psychology was toward cognitive science. Now, cognitive science is an established field. How intolerant they were toward the field I'm working on, cognitive development, cognitive neuroscience, new lines, translational sciences, etc., etc. And why I do mention cognitive, because this is a brilliant part of CEU, my former colleagues, from my, two of them from my research institute, well-recognized psychologists and working on the field of theoretical and cognitive neuroscience. They are part of the Hungarian higher education and quality science, because quality and excellence that counts, and so we have to work on and not the second-order research and education comes up. And that's the problem in Hungary, because we face all the time the small country effect. And the small country effect is very important from a quality assurance point of view. Really establishing universities and programs, etc. When we compare with the United States, there the market has a fantastic regulatory role, where you know what a degree, what a paper means when it comes from the Harvard or from MIT, and when it comes from a no-name university or just established university. This we do not have here, and so that's why we are going so slowly in Hungary. Thank you.
I think István should continue.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I prepared a presentation, and I want to tell you why I feel entitled to be here. As Professor Chikan said, I used to be a professor at University of Szeged. I retired this past March. I served for 10 years in the Hungarian Accreditation Committee. I also served as Vice Rector for my university, and for the past 17 years I chaired a doctoral school in linguistics. Also, in the meantime, for the past 25 years, I've written op-eds in various journals, papers, dailies about problems, the complaints, the difficulties of the higher education situation in Hungary. So I think I know a lot about what's going on in the higher education scene. When I prepared my slides, and I'm still looking for how to go on. Yes. I didn't know of Professor Scott's eloquent and wonderful lecture, but of course I realized that the prerequisite of academic freedom is university autonomy, and the prerequisite for critical thinking is academic freedom. So what is critical thinking being the bedrock of university level education, which I learned from one of my idols, Karl Popper, whose book was one of my Bibles, Logic of Scientific Discovery, when I wanted to know about what type of science linguistics can be. Anyway, there are certain principles of properties defining university autonomy, which are commonplace, which is the commonplace. There is organizational autonomy, financial autonomy, which includes funding for instruction, research, and upkeep, staffing autonomy, the freedom of appointment and tenure, and academic autonomy, freedom of instruction and research. There is one aspect which is not usually included, and it's not included in the survey that I will cite here, which is the state of quality assurance. And I will challenge my learned colleague, Professor Csépe, here to some degree, which is the selection of members in an accreditation board, the funding of the accreditation board, and its general independence. As I said, independently of this conference, I did come across the latest survey by the European University Association, which is based on data from 2015 and 2016, and I will show Hungary's position vis-à-vis other countries, also in retrospect. The indicators are given in the next slide, and it is only concerned with institutional autonomy and not with the independence of the accreditation boards. And as far as I could see, there was no visible attention paid to private or denominational colleges, which is, I believe, an important factor. And the sources to look at. This is the general, the four basic ingredients: organizational autonomy, define their financial autonomy, staffing autonomy, and academic autonomy. I'm afraid I don't have time to go over each of them in detail. Let us see Hungary's position in this. Is this a pointer?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, but this I have moved forward a little. Yes, academic autonomy ranking. No, I'm sorry. This is yes, that's the first one. Organizational autonomy ranking out of 29 countries, and Hungary is placed here. Hope you can see. Okay. Next, and this is the interesting figure. Has it increased, decreased, or remained stable? Hungary is blue. It's decreased compared with the previous survey. And there are only 4 other countries, but those 4 other countries are much higher. Look at Estonia. Estonia decreased to number 5. Oh, how silly I am. Okay, let's move on to financial autonomy ranking. Hungary is way down, 28th. Okay, we'll see the reasons why. And there are 4 other countries: Estonia, Hessen, Ireland, and Hungary. The 4 that decreased. Then there is staffing autonomy. And Hungary is 22nd. And lo and behold, it's again decreased. It's blue again. And it's the last one, academic autonomy, where Hungary is 16, and this was referred to by Professor Csépe, and it shows it in orange, so it's increased, but I will return to this, but let's see the overall picture. From 16 to 2011 to 23rd, from 6th to 28th, from top to bottom, from 17th to 22nd, and academic 24th to 16th. And look at the note. Freedom to select quality assurance boards counts for 26% of the overall score, while freedom to terminate degree programs counts only for 16% of the total. So by the single act of allowing Hungarian university to choose their quality assurance boards, to check them, we have improved a lot. I wonder if that is such a liberty. Now let's see my comments on this. This has been mentioned by Professor Chikan. The merging and splitting up of institutions is done by fiat. They don't even ask the institutions whether they want to belong to a new system. This has happened to his own university, Corvinus University. First, one of the faculties was removed and moved into the new favorite university of our cherished government, the University of Public Administration. Then the University of Physical Education, another favorite, was split off the Budapest University of Medicine. Other universities it's not juggling with universities. So at one time I happened to write in one of my op-eds that for the ministry The public universities are campuses of the University of Hungary. And that's what we are. Sorry, I moved on. Yes. Rectors' elections were overruled in 2013 at 2 universities. The top selected candidate was not appointed by the ministry. This was a first. This had never happened before. There was an uproar. Even the Hungarian Rectors Conference, represented here by Professor Vass, objected to it. So they promised not to do it again. The law hasn't changed, but they haven't done it again. But they imposed chancellors. Professor Chikan mentioned what their duty is. A chancellor is selected by the ministry and appointed by the prime minister. The university, the senate, the rector has no say in it. The chancellor is hired and employed by the minister. They are regularly invited to conferences in the ministry, and they get their instructions from the ministry. They are a foreign body in the university. They have full power on hiring non-academics, and of course they have full power on any financial decision. Okay, we used to have finance directors at universities who could object to a rector's decision for financial, for rational, for constitutional reasons. That's okay. That's okay. I used to work as a head of an institution, and I know what it is like. But my finance manager wasn't connected directly to some ministry. Okay, budgets. There has been a long process of change since 1993, when the first law of higher education was enacted in Hungary, and it was enacted by the first freely elected government in Hungary, which was a truly conservative government. Now, that liberal legislation that allowed for various types of budgetary norms, these don't exist anymore. There are case-by-case budgets decided by ministries, which is why rectors don't raise their voices. They can juggle with EU funding. There are various project proposals, several billion forints worth, that are allocated to various universities without any general principle. And then you have to spend it in a limited amount of time, and then it's over. Okay, there are arbitrary decisions on funding. Okay, arbitrary decisions on funding students. Government-funded students are allocated to various degree programs and various universities. Your own university has no say in it. At one time, most students were allocated to 2 universities only. I mean, government-supported, government-subsidized law students. Oh, right. I have to hurry. On top of this, there are consistoria. A consistorium was appointed over the Senate next to the Chancellor. They are responsible for general financial decisions. 3 members of the consistorium are appointed by the minister. The 4th member is the Chancellor, appointed by the minister, and the 5th member is the rector. Independence of the Accreditation Board. My experience is that it has been seriously encroached upon. In the 1993 law, half of the members were elected by the Academy, were selected by the Academy of Sciences, half of them were selected by universities and various organizations. Now, half of the members are appointed by the minister, and half of them by various organizations, including the Rectors Conference. Funding is no longer independent. In the first law of higher education, it was enacted that funding for the accreditation board was decided by Parliament. Currently, the minister has prior consent to any new degree program submitted to the accreditation body. You first have to submit it to the ministry, and they can overrule the board. The ministry can overrule the board rulings, and there is this recent scandal with gender studies where a higher education secretary for the Ministry of Education complained about introducing a gender studies program at a prestigious Hungarian university. And the last point is that degree programs are abruptly terminated by the ministry. I listed two of them. Others are assigned only to favorites. Political science can only be taught at the University of Public Service. Okay, what are the lessons to be learned? There has been little resistance by academics, even less from rectors, including the Rectors' Conference, except the case of overruling the rector's election and the chancellor system. And the minister's appointees for those infamous cases in 2013, they have been re-elected this year without any opposition. There is a recent funny, tragic letter from the Secretary for Education to one of our universities determining the top level of salary that can be given to professors whether or not they have their extra bonuses from EU projects. Those salaries cannot be higher than that of a section head in the ministry, the letter stated. Tragic. And there are the universities in special favor, and the Rectors' Conference inept objection to Overblack's CEU, and their only objection concerned the fact that as a consequence of this, there will be less foreign students coming to Hungary. But hope is not lost. There have been strong demonstrations supporting CEU, so there is still hope that we will stand up against repression of university autonomy and academic freedom. Thank you.
Thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation. By education, I studied philosophy, literature, later sociology, so I like to raise the fundamental questions. The fundamental question, I suppose, is that what is the university for? What is the purpose of a university? I came from Eötvös Lóránd University, and let me use the founding dean of our university. Our university was founded in a small rural town in Nagyszombat in 1635 by Cardinal Peter Pázmány. By the way, this Nagyszombat today is Trnava and Slovakia, as a Catholic university for teaching theology and philosophy. Now, according to the deed of foundation of Eötvös Lóránd University, I'm very sorry that I'm unable to give back the flavor of this old-style text in English, but it says something like that it had an utmost importance to open a university to temper the nature of the pugnacious nation and to educate people capable to govern the church and to serve the state. Let me emphasize, serve the state. Now, there is another leading figure in the history of education in Hungary, József Eötvös, who happened to be the father of Eötvös Lóránd, who wrote in his famous work, The Dominant Ideas of 19th Century, that literacy or education is the precondition of liberty or freedom. Now, although his concept wasn't implemented, but he wrote in a quite detailed way about his vision about the university, the ideal university. And it says that this kind of university would be based on the equality of faculties, freedom of research of the professors, freedom of, or the liberty to present their scientific results and convictions, and its objective, as I mentioned, that according to him, knowledge is something like the precondition of freedom. So the objective of the university to develop free individuals for a free society, and its precondition is a good education. Now, after the revolution in the 19th century, of course, not the ideas of József Eötvös were the basis of the new university system in Hungary, but as it was mentioned here as well, the ideas of Wilhelm von Humboldt, and the structure, the university structure is very much following the German or the Prussian tradition. Now, according to Humboldt, science is the free activity of human beings. Its freedom is the dominant principle of both science and that of the university. And what is important, the role of the university is not to provide civil servants and good Christian subjects for the state, but to teach and exercise science in the spirit of academic freedom. And this suggested the students should have the right to choose their professors. The council of the university has to get rid of the direct control of the education by the state, and the university should get stronger real autonomy. Now, if we put together these ideas, Cardinal Peter Pázmány said that, or his idea about the university, to get people to serve the state, then József Eötvös said that education, literature is the precondition of freedom of the society. And then Humboldt again said that the purpose of the university is not to have good or create good subjects for the state, but knowledgeable, critical thinking, autonomous individuals. I also got to the Constitution of Hungary, but I put it into a different context, let me say. The last constitution, which is called the Constitution of the Republic of Hungary, till the beginning of 2010, it said the Republic of Hungary shall respect and support the freedom of scientific and artistic expression, the freedom to learn and to teach. Only scientists are entitled to decide in questions of scientific truth and to determine the scientific value of research. This was the, let's say, old constitution of the Republic of Hungary. Now we have a fundamental law of Hungary. Even the name, it's not the Constitution of the Republic of Hungary, but something like a fundamental law. And it says, Hungary shall protect the scientific and artistic freedom of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences and the Hungarian Academy of Arts. I don't have to emphasize the difference of the scientific and artistic freedom of the Academy of Sciences, which is financed by the government, and so on, and the protection of the freedom of scientific and artistic expression. And at the end, because I thought that I will take seriously these 7 minutes, what we got, I got to the same ranking as both of you got. And I would like to give the overall picture, and from this puzzle you can create your own pictures. what I gave you from these fragments of the history of Hungarian universities and the history of academic freedom. So the same research, university autonomy in Europe, it says that if a university wants to be successful, has to have 4 types of autonomies. Autonomy in organizational issues, Hungary is the 23rd, based on complex indicators from the 29 European countries. Financial autonomy from the 29 countries, Hungary is the 28th. Staffing autonomy, Hungary is the 22nd, and academic autonomy, it's the 16th. So this is how I see this question. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes. So I will be very short, I think. We have to know that this country is very bureaucratic in some ways. The governments just love to regulate, so it doesn't matter that if it is necessary or not. This is a centuries-long history, so it's not new. For the private universities, sometimes it is very controversial because we are under that general regulation. Obviously, we have to follow every legal regulation, but there is a small exceptional field. This is the employment of the teachers. So, because in the public sector, the teachers are public employees, and from this respect, we are operating under the general labor code, which is basically for the private sector and the business sector. So it means that all teachers generally have no such stable position and protected position than in the public universities. And funny enough, but it gives us more flexibility in many respects. But there is another issue, which is a big question of the academic freedom and autonomy in the 22nd century. So what is the mission of a higher education institution? So I love that vision of Humboldt and the 19th century unified utopia about the elite academic caste having very high social respect and special privileges in the society. But today, is it accurate or not? So we in the private universities and colleges in Hungary feel that so the capitalistic market economy just destroyed such protected enclaves in the society. So why the professors have such a protected position? Because they have the knowledge, and the other do not have the knowledge. So and obviously the biggest tension is between the politicians and the professors, because the politicians was born to know everything, and the professors learn everything. So it's a problem. But so if we want to understand a significant dimension of our current problems, maybe we can move closer to the history and the story of the public administration in Hungary, which is similarly centralized, step-by-step politicized. During the last 27 years, every government moved even closer to the spoil system. in the public administration. It was happening on the field of higher education as well, from this point of view. But again, I don't see that it would be a direct pressure or intervention from the government against the academic freedom. So there are many maybe traditional signs of obeying the I can say that sometimes it's mistakenly believed that this is a kind of expectation of the politicians or the government. But so there are again hundreds of years of history when Hungarians learned how we can survive. In one side to obey and the other side to cheat the government. And because so the society, the relations and the regulations sometimes in society are not really transparent. So the people know very well that, okay, so the government wants to do that and we do the other thing. It is not good, obviously, because we need clear normative regulations which are transparent and we can operate well. And it means that we need obviously more autonomy, but also more efficient and more effective regulations many times. When we started our private university, within 2 years we recognized that we can do everything 20% lower costs than the state universities do, because we could operate much more efficiently. And from the beginning we had a chancellor or provost or whatever we call it as a executive director in the system. This position was very highly ranked and very strong position, but it had a lot to operate on the possible most economic way and to use the resources much better. And obviously, in a very fragmented higher education system, the government has ever had a headache on the finance, but we saw the figures that how unstable or waning finance, the level of the finance of the higher education is true. Unfortunately, we are a 4 years country because we have parliament elections every 4 years and everything is starting again in the next period. So the higher education policy should be much longer term. It is not 4 years long policy cycle, maybe minimum 8 years or whatever. But we haven't had more than 4 years calm period in our development during the last 25 years. So it is also a big problem. So finally, I just want to raise a question. What is the vision of the higher education in the 22nd century? What is the mission of the universities? What is the position of the highly educated researchers and professors in a society? What does it mean, the autonomy in a globalized world when there are networks and nobody can be out of the networks? Financial, scientific, social, whatever, every kind of. And we are depending on the networks. And we are depending on those influences which are coming from networks.
I think we will have a short time for questions, but before turning to that, I would just like to summarize a little bit what actually I have got as a consequence from this discussion. I think it is clear that the problems of Hungarian higher education are very deeply rooted in social and political background, and that the transition has actually created in principle an opportunity of changing some of the trends which we have experienced. But instead of that, the political considerations in the 1990s and 2000s has generally overruled the academic considerations, and because of that, the higher education as such couldn't go into the direction where the global requirements and its own requirements would have liked to do. And there were many expectations about the policy of the Orbán government about higher education as well, and it is a kind of a disappointment that they didn't go to the direction of the education of the 21st century, but actually in many rules and laws and acts are turning to the opposite direction. And one of the most significant part of that is attack against the CEU, which is kind of a flagship of academic quality and freedom in Hungary. So I think that this is not what the Hungarian society would require, and it is not what can help Hungary to get into a better position in the increasingly complex, globalized world. So there is a need for very fundamental changes. That's what I believe, and in this belief I give you the floor to have some questions and comments.
Please.
Yes.
The Hungarian Central Bank has created some foundations which provide teaching with doctoral schools. Can you tell us about the legal status of these private universities? Are they accredited? And is it a tool to teach ideology, to have ideology and politics into teaching, or how do you see this?
I cannot say I have studied it, but I have written about it. The fact is that the Hungarian National Bank has made profits of hundreds of billions of forints, which it didn't pay into the national budget, but set up foundations. Foundations that it called Pallas Athene foundations, some of which, yes, Minerva, yes, some of which was intended for doctoral programs. They approached a number of universities. They have a contract with Corvinus University. I don't know the details, but it's an already existing doctoral program at Corvinus University that they are supporting. But they tried their hands at the University of Pécs, but they were refused by the Faculty of Economics, and that they went to the doctoral program in geography. And they have some globalization program within that doctoral school, and each doctoral school has the right to start a new program within its field. Whether it is within its field, it's questionable, but at least they get a lot of funding. And each student gets a lot of funding in this program. They started another program at the University of Győr, Széchenyi University at Győr. As far as I recall, I don't have exact data off the cuff, but they are not legal, independent doctoral programs. They are parasitic on already existing programs. On top of this, one of their foundations, one of these bank's foundations, helps building a new university at Kecskemét, and this will be used to host everyone in this room. The Kecskemét University was by act of parliament called Hála University. But a month ago, Parliament has decreed that it will have a new name. It will be called John von Neumann University, after the famous Hungarian mathematician. And even the university homepage doesn't know about it.
And just the status of that institute. So it was a merge of two countryside colleges, state colleges, and now behind that the unified institute there is a big foundation made by the National Bank, and it is financing this merged university. It's college yet, but maybe we'll have the status of the University of Applied Sciences soon.
May I have some words in this from an accreditation point of view? So what concerns the universities, that actually there are a lot of new universities, the so-called universities of applied sciences. And so some of them are the results of merge of different faculties, previous colleges, etc. And this belongs to the same, so the one in Kecskemét and one in Solna. And the foundational support is a different issue. So there are existing, all the existing doctoral schools in economics can apply, so the students can apply for this scholarship, as far as I know. I don't want to interfere with anything, so I don't know by heart how the National Bank participates in this. I have my own opinion as a citizen, but as the president of the Hungarian Accreditation Committee, I know that the doctoral schools went through a normal accreditation process that concerns the criteria, and they met the criteria. And the other issue is the funding, and how, and it's a delicate issue what concerns the National Bank. But in the private sector, in the business sector, it's possible to give foundation, I don't want to name big firms, etc., who support different programs at the universities. And from a point of view, if you compare with the United States, it's nothing wrong with it. The problem arises there when this part of the private sector interferes with the program, interferes with the accreditation, tries to push it through via lobbying. And so I could manage 2 times something very valuable in 9 months. These are my 2 sons. And I am the president of the Hungarian Accreditation Committee since 9 months. This is much more difficult and much more long-lasting process than 9 months to change all of these processes, and especially the different committees, so who can be chosen and appointed freely, etc., etc. I don't want to go into detail, but we shouldn't mix up our opinion with the facts. Thank you.
Thank you. I just would like to add that the problem, so I wouldn't like to support it at all. It's very complicated. I mean, there are clever people, who operate those things, so it cannot be explained in a few words how do they do it, but I wish they didn't do it.
Yes. Thank you. My question is on the internationalization of higher education, and I picked this topic partly because this is where CEU could help most Hungarian higher education. So my question is, are there plans to make it easier for foreign scholars to come to work in Hungary? Could we move a little bit away from the current situation when specifically Hungarian titles, academic titles, matter so much in the accreditation of doctoral schools and many other processes?
That's a delicate issue. This is for a whole conference, actually. And the problem is that Hungary is a mixture of different systems. They introduced, they imported everything what existed on the world. So we have an Anglo-Saxonian degree, that's the PhD. And we have a habilitation according to the German speaking countries' systems, educational systems. And we have, as this title, it's not a degree, a title of Doctor of Sciences, given by the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, and it's rooted somehow in the previous system. So I don't say it's rooted in a Stalinistic system, because then it's not very nice, because there are highly recognized people who have this title. But the problem is how to get how get through the accreditation and the criteria measurements. So, for example, when someone applies for professorship, and the problem is that so the Hungary has a long-lasting history in bypassing everything what we do not like. And so if we had so many bypasses in our heart or coronary, so we wouldn't live anymore. So Hungary still lives with so many bypasses, and the higher education still lives with so many bypasses. It's on the table at the accreditation committee. So the accreditation committee is a tiny little institution whose budget comes partly from the state budget and the remaining part from others. But we try to influence as much as possible, so the legislative changes what concerns the doctoral schools, foreign experts, etc. And I know how difficult it was at many universities to get foreign professors and pushing them through the Hungarian system to be professors here in Hungary, and there was, in the opinion and in the evaluation of the experts, we guess they are not going to stay in Hungary, they are just a decoration on a doctoral school. So that even there is a serious bias. And in the evaluation, it occurs, the envy, the competition, and everything, and it's very complex. I would be very happy if a good PhD degree and a very nice science record would be enough to become a professor at the universities.
I fully agree. I don't want to add anything, except that there is a lunch waiting for us outside. So I kindly ask our rector and president.
I wanted to thank all our participants in the panel, our Hungarian colleagues and friends. One of the striking things, if you listen to that panel, was the honesty, the frankness, the brutal honesty with which certain problems were raised. One of the hopeful signs, it seems to me, was something about European integration. We could see that at work. That is, all of you took out comparative tables of Hungarian performance in comparison to other countries. That's a very important symbol of the ways in which one of our participants referred to the small country syndrome. The surest way to overcome the small country syndrome is to compare yourself to others and set yourself some targets. And it seemed to me that this was a very important indicator of just how committed and concerned people who love Hungarian academic life for all its problems and faults, how determined you are to set your standards against the top of the rankings and work your way up bit by bit. And CEU is one little piece of this system, and we want to be as helpful as we can and be part of that gradual and progressive improvement based on the kind of lacerating honesty that many of you displayed in this fine discussion. We're going to break for lunch. Again, when coffee comes out, indiscipline breaks out. When lunch breaks out, similar indiscipline. When food is placed before academics, it all falls apart. So we got to be back at 1:15 because we have a very important panel chaired by Jonathan Cole, a person who has published and written on academic freedom and is one of our trustees, and we will have Alison Stanger, Helga Otney, Rogers, Brubaker, and Leon Botstein on the panel. So we will be back at 1:15 sharp in this hall. Thank you so much.
No,